I'm at Slavoid T.
All right, this is Shit Spouter 37.
This is Black.com pilled.
This is the Fed Post.
Just run through everything pretty fast. This surprisingly a lot. I feel like last week's episode was fucking a year ago, like the GameStop thing. I feel like a lot has happened since then. I guess we could start with this AOC thing and the it's fresh on my mind because I just saw Rashida Tlaib was giving like a similar speech, and she was just like Tlaib, yeah, exactly, and she was just like doing basically the same thing, and AOC was like on her arm and like she was crying. Did you guys see that video?
I saw like a little brief second of it.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, she was like, all I could do was thank Allah at that moment that I wasn't there. Pretty based.
Yeah, that's kind of based, yeah.
Wait, where was Tlaib?
Who knows? I guess I think she was also like in her offices, probably like where AOC was, not on the fucking Capitol grounds, but she'll just admit to it and AOC just won't.
Right. Dude, see, that's what, distinguishes the winners from the losers is AOC's willing to make a real tale out of it.
Oh yeah, you gotta double down when you're caught in your bullshit in this type of media racket. You can't succumb to it and tell the truth now.
Dude, for sure.
Yeah, did you see the TikTok of her? Like, I just like I didn't watch any of these vids in full, but like AOC was like standing up and like showing how the door was in front of her and like was like reenacting it. It was just mad cringe. I'd heard about it before I'd seen it. I just couldn't believe that she was really like going all out with it. But like, yeah, I mean, she's saying like the Capitol officer was trying to attack her and then saying that he didn't give an extraction point or something. Like he was like giving misinformation. Then she changed the story later about it. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, at first I was like, she didn't go to the extraction point. She said because she was scared that her fellow congressman may try to harm her or like act to take her life. Yeah, totally. Which would like be like kind of based if someone attempted it. Like, I'm not saying I'm advocating for that, but like if there happened to be a scuffle or two in Congress or on the Senate floor, I wouldn't be mad. Like some fisticuffs going around.
Yeah, it'd be pretty bad. It's not unprecedented.
Yeah, but so then she realized that sounded way too ridiculous to think that other Congress people are going to kill her. So she was like, well, actually, there was like this guard and he like looked at me funny. And I don't know if he forgot to tell us where the extraction point is or purposefully withheld the information. But I just never knew. Yeah. So she changed her story again, and it's just crazy, man. She just keeps fucking flopping around like a fish out of water.
Yeah, just like blatantly lie. But they got the PolitiFact and like all the fact checkers saying that she wasn't lying, I guess. And
zero Pinocchios.
Yeah, she didn't cop any Pinocchios for that performance.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, yeah, just seeing Rashida do it, I mean, it is just sort of this whole thing of like all, I just remember just people being like, oh, no, Omar's the good one. No, Rashida's the good one. And it's just,
Omar's
it's all the same.
one.
And Right.
And Rashida's the ugly one.
Yeah. Right. That's all you really need to know. AOC's flat as a board on the back end.
Right. Yeah, this is all debatable. Obviously, it's still in the air, but either way, just like
I got some pushback on that, but
yeah, no, it's just the victim thing. It's just the I don't know. I feel like they just had like a Pelosi like model, and they just updated with a patch of having like a woman in color, and like that's what I mean. Like that's pretty much what the squad is, and it's just like I don't know. It just seems like they're trying to play as like a victim and make you forget that they're the people who aren't giving you your checks. Like they're the same politician as they have as much power as McConnell or well, not as McConnell, but like all these other people in Congress. It's just like it's like a fake victimization thing.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's like a sycophant fucking like psychopolitics. Like they're like, oh, look at me, like how strong I am from having lived through this fucking lived trauma of being at the Congress when some civilians happen to walk in. Like, dude, fucking what?
Right. Were you watching any of that, Jeff, or you just been tuning that shit out? Or
of all the topics we're talking about today, this is the one where I have the least information because I just did not pay much attention to it at all. So I don't have a strong comment on that one.
All right.
Honestly, not a bad call.
Honestly, it's the dumbest one. Yeah.
I was like involved in a little bit of like discussions around it, but I didn't like follow it super closely. closely. And I mean, it basically is just like whatever you're assuming AOC, you know, the hay that she made out of this, you're probably completely correct in all of your assumptions. It's just exactly what you'd expect, right? Like,
gotcha.
Yeah, I saw Michael Tracy going off on the timeline about it, and I like read his article in New York Post, so I posted it to my like normal Facebook page. I dealt with like crazy backlash from libs, and like so my mind was a little bit fixated on that for a second. But yeah, I mean it's just retarded AOC shit like always. It's just run of the mill.
Yeah. It's all part of the continuum of just endless crying AOC pictures, and just like her at the border crying at the empty street, and just like it's all just an endless bitch gate and all that. It's the same thing. It's just, you know, that's it, you know. It's just like, forget about your problems. Just, you know, this politician, this congressperson is like all you should be concerned about, not your own problems.
Right. Really, I mean, this one's especially interesting just because like she is so clearly like the advertising firm for like this new war on terror. And like she's just so full-throatedly like the face of it.
Oh yeah.
And so like that, I mean, that's like deeply concerning, but yeah.
It's it's just sick because like how the whole thing is like, I feared for my life and what if I was in danger and what if I died? And it's like, bitch, people actually died there that day.
Absolutely.
That weren't fucking you, that were regular ass people, bitch. That like, those are the people should feel bad about, not you just like thinking that you may have been scared because like there's some possibility you may have seen a dude with some Viking horns on or some shit.
Right.
Yeah, but those were chuds and cops. So
right. And she amazingly managed to throw in Me Too in there, which it's just amazing. It's just, I mean, you know, whether that's true or not, like I don't need to speculate on that, but like her endorsing Biden and the terror rate thing, whether that's true or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just it's not really true. It doesn't really matter the details of what's true. It's just like, just look at that. Just on its face. What does that tell you? Yeah. What does that tell you?
That right before her sob story about how scared she was living through this fake trauma. Like, okay, bitch, whatever.
Yeah. I guess it's gonna come back. I mean, it went away for Biden's thing, but I guess Me Too and BLM and all this shit is just, you know, it's gonna come back.
Useful.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But
fucking sickos.
Yeah. There's that, and I guess what's the other thing? The Times article. That
Time magazine, you mean?
Yeah.
Time magazine. Yeah, that shit
broke my brain for a little bit.
That was wild. Yeah.
Did you read through it?
Yeah, I mean, I read the whole thing. I read it a couple times.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. You know, I read it with the mind to try to interpret what the intent behind it was. Because I always assume something like that is not an accident, right? Like there just weren't all these different organizations that were, you know, interviewed for that piece. I mean, they didn't just happen to all, for no reason or for without thinking about it, just give an inside interview like that and give all that inside information. Like that was obviously very coordinated. So, I mean, the conclusion that I drew as to the intent was that I thought it pretty much had to be like essentially a demoralization op, right? It was to try to get the point across to people like, hey, yup, you know, we did a bunch of stuff. We collaborated with each other. We are a shadowy cabal. We were doing all this stuff. And you know what? We're going to come right out. We're going to say it. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it.
Right,
so don't start thinking that like you can vote or organize, to use a trite term there or whatever, but like, you know, or do anything that, you know, is going to make a difference. You might as well just give up. You know, go back to your house, stop voting, and we'll let the fentanyl come into your neighborhood, I guess.
Right. Log off and grill. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, I think that was sort of the idea. Like, it's a demoralization thing. Now, I mean, that's not without its downsides for sort of the ruling class, right? Because when you come out and you do something like that, I mean, they're giving up a couple things. I mean, first of all, number one, like, the U.S. system typically doesn't operate this way. You know, it operates with whether you believe the democracy we have is real or not doesn't really matter. It's always had that sort of sheen, and enough people believed in it that acted as a legitimation mechanism, right? Like that's what kept the United States at relative peace. It's what's sort of made the whole system work. And also the other thing that you know, function that serves is it sort of obfuscates the exercise of power, right? When you combine sort of like a democratic system with like a very free market system, power is very obfuscated. When things go wrong, like you lose your job or things are getting more expensive and you can't keep up with cost of living, you don't necessarily know who to blame, right? Because the picture that's being painted is that none of this is centrally planned. There's not a lot of accountability there.
Right.
That's like in contrast to like a place like China where, and I don't pretend to be an expert on China, and I don't want anybody to interpret me as like standing for China here. I'm just using it as a contrast. Like a place like China, like if like that shit's not going well for you, you know that like Xi Jinping and other party elders are behind that, right? Like that's very clear.
Right.
There's an accountability issue there. So that's why we haven't like typically seen this sort of thing in the United States. I mean, the way that article was written and the narrative that was portrayed, I still think it helps them avoid accountability because there were so many different pieces and parts in play there that, you know, people still don't really know who to blame per se, but it does pull the sheen off the democracy part of it for a significant percentage of the population. And if you're trying to govern a state where, you know, let's say that before 2016, I don't know, 5 or 10% of the population thought that this was all bullshit, right? And that there was this shadowy cabal running everything. Right. Now, if that number is like, or that their vote didn't matter in some way. But now if you're getting up to that number and it's like 30, 40, 50% of people start to believe that, and not just believe it in a way where they say it in an offhand thing in a conversation where they're unhappy with the way things are going, but where they're like actually really passionately believing it, you're governing an entirely different type of state now, where, you know, I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, totally.
There's an entirely new type of governance you're going to have to engage in if that's the population you're governing now.
Yeah, it comes down to more of like a coercion rather than consent building.
Right, exactly. Right. And it's a step towards formalism, right? It's a step. It's not a full step. It's not like a Chinese level of formalism where somebody's very clearly in charge, but I think they're trying to straddle a half measure now. In terms of formalism, they're trying to fit into some sweet spot in between where, say, the US and other Western democracies traditionally have been and where like China is. And I think the reason they want to sit in that middle spot is they want some of the benefits of increased formalism, you know, but they don't want the accountability to go like full China level. You know, that's my sort of take on it.
Right. Yeah. I think all these things as they come out and the way it just looks on a surface level is that, yeah, this is all smoothing the transition to China. And I mean, I used to say that like last year and I don't know, it felt like a little conspiratorial, or even just saying like, oh, you know, there's back rooms where these people decide these things. And, you know, just like with a lot of stuff, you know, that when you talk about power in general and people, you know, regular normie people sometimes have a hard time grasping this thing where they'll say, what, you really think there's like a room or there's like a, you know, where these people are talking about these things and deciding these things.
Like it's a Zoom call, not a room.
Yeah, now it's a Zoom call. Yeah. Well, they just find it like very far-fetched or like fantastical or whatever. But like it really, you know, I mean, then you see these articles where these people can't help but brag. And I mean, I don't know if it's a demoralizing thing. To me, it seemed like, you know, I've been around these like people like in my career or whatever. And like they a lot of them on these levels like are sort of oblivious, you know what I mean? And just sort of like in a bubble and just sort of like self-congratulatory all the time. And I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if these people were just bragging and like patting themselves on the back and just had no idea how it sounded. And I mean, on the level, I mean, on a surface level, it doesn't sound that crazy overall. I mean, it's just like, all right, the left is there, the TSA is there.
I don't know. It sounds pretty blatant. Dude, the language they use is pretty fucking wild.
Yeah. No, listen. I mean, I think the whole thing was blatantly rigged. I think it's super rigged. But all I mean is that, like, they left enough of, like, a gap where it could be kind of brushed away. Because there were libs in my replies that were just like, oh, well, you know, this is all legal. This is all technically legal and all that. And, like, you know, we kind of knew they were already somewhat had the same interests or whatever. So what's the big deal? So
the language they use, though, is like it's inflammatory. It has to be. Like, they literally say, quote, the conspiracy to save the 2020 election. They use the word like conspiracy. They say it was not rigging. They were fortifying. They use all the words. Like, it has to be inflammatory. They know what they're doing with those words. I mean, and to an extent, I feel like it has to be intentional, like as a demoralization effort. But it feels like they're prodding a fucking ant bed. Like they're just trying to be able to stir up a little bit more dissent action from the people on the right who are already going to believe this and dig into it, to where you can have one more reason, like the January 6th type of thing, maybe smaller scale and more spread out, to just further us into this whole domestic terrorism thing.
I think that I only read, like, I'm the only one in here, I think, that didn't read the full thing. I read like a third of it, and most of what I read did kind of seem like it was kind of just talking about like information campaigns, right? Which seemed like patently obvious already. Right. I'd be interested, like, and it'd probably be helpful, like, for our listeners to like have one of you guys like maybe describe out what it. What
I wrote down a fuckload of quotes from it. That I thought were just like particularly despicable.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear that. I think my one take, because I did talk to my girlfriend about it because she had read it, and I mean, again, I'm the guy that didn't read it, so take it with a grain of salt. But like, I remember a couple weeks ago I was talking on here about like when you just kind of like the highest form of just like memes that you can kind of translate anything into is just kind of like making anything just kind of like an eye roll worthy cliche, right? Like talking points and any political issue, you can just kind of like introduce that into the mainstream. And once the normies have gotten a hold on it, if you say, you know, the position that's counter to whatever the libs is, it gets like a groan and an eye roll. And I think that's really like intentional, and that's a really specific effect that's kind of engineered. And I think that's kind of partly like, because I'm reading this shit, right? And I'm like, why are they saying this stuff? Like, why, like, no one's making them say this shit. Why are they doing it, right? And I think part of it is because like you bring it up yourself, and like, apologies if this is like kind of an unfocused way of putting it, but like you introduce this topic into the mainstream, you know, so they can have like the establishment can kind of have their hand planted on it and kind of have control of this thing before, you know, it goes off into the wild, and they kind of get that level of ownership over it, so that it can just quickly become, you know, this thing that the smug lib can just go, oh, yeah, I mean, like, it's not like anyone's hiding this, like, the Times just said this the other day, and like, exactly. But
I
not
had a
even
classic example of this, by the way. The classic example was, remember, for maybe the 2 months before the election, they just said, hey guys, just so you know, on election night, Donald Trump's going to win big, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yes, exactly. Zuckerberg was on Axios saying like, hey, don't be surprised if it takes 3 weeks to count the votes. Don't worry about that. I'm like, oh, word. Okay. You know what I mean? Telegraphing right there. Like, what
that's
else?
Not to mention the fact that like on actual like Instagram and Facebook, no matter, like, if you scroll past 3 posts, there's going to be a little warning that's going to pop up that just is thrown into your timeline willy nilly that just says reminder about election results fraud. And it's just like, there is nothing wrong with mail-in voting. These are just as secure as anything, blah, blah, blah. Like, literally just like widgets and gadgets on your timeline that are like libified for TV babies to read and say, oh, well, look, Facebook tells me that it's secure. Like, and they talk about that in the fucking article. It's, I mean,
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I'll just add in that, again, I probably said it before, but New York Times in 2012 said it's granny farming. That's what they said about mail-in ballots. They said that, you know, so.
Yeah, well, let's also talk about the fact
obviously
that
no other countries do it, right? I mean, I don't want to say no other countries. Most other countries don't do it because they consider it insecure. Most European countries don't do it. And, you know, it's the funny part about it is, like, if we even I mean, countries much poorer than the United States have much more secure elections, like Mexico, for instance. Like, you have to show ID, you have to do all kinds of stuff. And even, you know, absentee ballots in general, even for overseas people, what a lot of countries do is you don't get to mail your ballot in. They'll just set up a polling station in major cities outside of the home country. So, like, for instance, like in New York and New Jersey, the last year there was a Dominican Republic, a major election. I don't know much about their politics, but I do know that there were in-person polling stations for that Dominican Republic election in New York and New Jersey. Like, that's how they operate it, because they obviously don't think, mail-in voting is secure.
Right. But Jeff, we're in a pandemic, so I mean, that's why
exactly.
we're allowed to do this, and this is why this is okay. This unprecedented thing is completely
they
fine.
talk about that in the article too. Oh my God, it's crazy.
It's basically it kind of seems like whatever everyone's assumption about like keeping secrets intuitively is, right? That like, oh man, there's a lot of shit that they just like don't want to get out, right? The biggest secrets that the establishment and the powers that be have that they aren't happy with, they want to keep it from you. Like, just completely flip that on its head, right? Like, that's not the way it's done. I mean, within reason, right? Like, I guess like Epstein stuff and things like that.
Right. That's what I was about to say. Yeah.
Yeah. You definitely like want certain things that are just so, but like, as far as this goes, right? Like a political, horrendous machine moving. It's terrible gears. Like, I mean, just completely talk about it in the open, right? That's how you hide a conspiracy like this. Just talk about it openly. Fuck it. Just talk about it openly. And people just, it's a bunch of, like, everybody always just reads the headlines and shit like that. Right. And then like, how many of the people that just read it didn't just fucking like glaze over halfway through the shit anyways. And it's just kind of, like, oh, well, if they're saying it, like, that in and of itself, the fact that they're openly saying it is the biggest takeaway of like normalcy that most people can probably get from it. Right.
Yeah. People in power telling you this is normal is all they need to do to make it normal. Zuckerberg was literally saying that, like, oh, this is going to take weeks, and that's perfectly normal. He said that in his weird alien android way. And it's like, oh yeah, that's not normal because that's never happened before. And he's just saying this is completely normal, and that makes it normal. And it's I tell people it's like the NSA leaks, right? So like after 9/11, they passed the Patriot Act in like record time. It flies through Congress and gets signed, right? And over the next, they got the hidden FISA courts. It's not seen by the public. It's completely opaque or whatever. And over the years, right, there's all these leaks that come out over the Bush years and into the Obama years. Just periodically, there's leaks, whistleblowers of like, oh shit, they're doing way more than just terrorists, and it's pretty bad, right? And every couple of years, it gets worse, and they just adjust. They just adjust the way they do the press conferences about it. Obama will just go up there and be like, oh, well, look, it's just metadata. Don't worry about it. It's just metadata. Okay. Like, we deputize these companies, these telecom communication companies, AT&T and all of them. And, it's not that bad. We just know the number of texts you're sending. We don't know what's in it. Who believes that? Who believes that if the day before Obama said that, they would have denied it, right? They would have denied it until it's leaked. So all I'm saying is that they'll adjust and reorient as these things come out because they have to. Mm-hmm. But, and this thing, I mean, they didn't even have to. I mean, they're just bragging, right? But all I'm saying is that it's way more than this. And I'm probably the most like Jones, like pilled, like, conspiracy brain about the election or whatever, like how blatantly rigged it was. And I mean, look, it's more than what's in this article. It's way more. But this is what they're throwing out in a measured way. And that they've got the media to reorient around, that's acceptable. And if you think this is where it ends, then you're very naive to me. That's how I can put it politely. Yeah,
it's like a show of force in a way too. Like, if you're already gonna believe that, like, okay, of course they're gonna do this stuff, like, or not of course, but like, oh, they were just trying to fortify the election. If you're already gonna believe that stuff in an article, then like, yeah, you're gonna use it like these libs are to be like, oh, look, they're telling us about it. It's totally fine. They wouldn't tell us about it if it was sketchy. But if you already doubted it, it's like it's showing you essentially like, hey, yeah, all that shit you were saying, you're right. We don't fucking care. We can do this, whatever. Just like we inaugurated Joe Biden with like the largest military presence ever. It's a show of force there too. Like, they're like, you know what? Fuck it. Yeah. Mask off, baby.
Right.
We're the state.
Yeah,
Let's fucking do it.
Yeah.
It's sicko shit, man. It's terrifying. Like, I don't know. I think it's going to be more and more mask off as we keep going along. Like, I think we're in a little bit of a transitionary period right now.
The balancing act is what's interesting to me, though, because everything you guys are saying is right, but they do not want to go to full China level because there's an accountability that comes with that. Yeah. They don't want that level of accountability. You know what I mean? Like, they actually want to do. I am not saying they'll be successful, but they want to do something worse worse than what China does. They want to be able to have like maybe not 100% of the control, but if they can get 75% of the control while having only 25% of the accountability by sort of obfuscating the way the power is exercised, they would go with that like 100%. They would love that. And that's like, so, I mean, to give you just an example of what I mean that's a little more concrete. So like in China, like if you want to say something on social media that let's say that the Chinese ruling class doesn't want you to say, like the Chinese government just says like, oh, you can't say this, right? Like that's the end of it. Jack Ma says some stuff he's not supposed to say. Jack Ma disappears for a couple weeks, right? Like that's how it works. Right. In the United States, like they sort of do it in an underhanded way, using like the social media companies being the one to drop the hammer, right? So you can't say like, oh, Joe Biden says I can't say this on social media, right? Because he's not the guy out there preventing you from saying it. It's Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or, you know, Jack Dorsey or whoever. So there's some benefit to that in that it sort of obfuscates the real exercise of power and it reduces some level of accountability, because now I'm not mad at Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I'm mad at, you know, who may not, in the U.S. system, they might not really be the ones pulling the strings, period, anyway, right? Because we have more of a market system, but whoever is pulling those strings. But I'm mad at, you know, Zuckerberg, for instance, who I actually don't think Zuckerberg particularly cares one way or the other what you say about Joe Biden on social media, but he obviously has financial interests in you saying certain things. So the whole thing is it's a lot more obfuscated, and it makes it much more difficult for people to know who to be angry at. Right. And it creates far reduced accountability, which I think they see as preferable.
That's absolutely true. And yeah, I mean, that was a big part of it, was the disinfo thing. And just like, I don't know, it's whenever I hear the media talking about disinformation, it just seems like newspeak to me. It's just like, it's just so brazen. And you know, we all remember the AOC panels, you know, berating Zuckerberg or whatever, being like, you need to stop the fake news that's going on social media that are getting these boomers excited or whatever. And like, you know, and Russian disinformation, you know, that was part of that too. But now it's just like anything basically against us is just all disinformation, and we need to clamp. And that's what they talked about in the article, is just like it needs to be clamped down on. They talked about changing voter laws to help against voter suppression. It's all newspeak. They're doing the voter suppression. They're the ones who are doing the disinformation. The people who are talking about that, they're the ones who are doing it. So it's just amazing.
In the article,
those hearings are a really good example of obfuscation too, because, you know, you can watch those hearings and you could come away with the opinion. Some people will watch it and come away with the opinion, well, like, oh, Zuckerberg doesn't really want to be censoring, but, you know, AOC forced him into it, right? The government forced his hand. And a whole other group of people will watch that and say like, well, you know, we'll maybe not see that hearing, or they won't draw that conclusion and they'll blame Zuckerberg himself instead. So it confuses and obfuscates. Like that serves like a very useful function.
Exactly. Yeah, they're working in tandem, but it makes it's kayfabe. It's just like, oh, we're upset at each other, you know, for whatever. But like they already figured this out a while ago. They already know the script, and it's mutually beneficial that they flag random fucking tweets as like, oh, this is disputed, you know, the election, this is disputed for election claims or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? It's all
or even beyond that, like burying shit with algorithms and stuff. Like I can even like say in the article, they talk about how they quote unquote pressured social media to take a harder line and use data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. What the fuck is a viral smear? And what the fuck do you mean data-driven strategies? So essentially they were saying they just like warped around these algorithms to be able to like boost some certain things they talk about. They talk about how there's some meme group among like all these liberal and left coalitions that they like made all these memes and stuff and put on social media. And they talk about that right after talking about how they had to force and pressure social media to remove disinformation. So essentially what they're saying here is that they use data-driven strategies to boost their positive, the ones that they wanted to boost. And then they use the data-driven strategies to fight the viral smears of things that they didn't want to boost, like the Hunter Biden laptop, fucking all of that different stuff that they just immediately memory hold or like would not let you retweet or anything like that. it's just nuts, man. Like,
yeah, AOC's crying video and people saying like, oh, that she was lying about that, she wasn't there. That is flagged. She sent some email out to her supporters like, flag this because you can use social media to flag this because it's not true. It's disinformation.
Yeah, and now
Not
they
what
have
she says.
that tweets, like that whatever the fuck Twitter Watch thing that they have now, where you can like report tweets like for being suspicious and all this thing. Like, I don't know, it's fucking crazy.
Hall monitors.
Yeah,
Birdwatch. Yeah,
Birdwatch. That's what it is.
Yeah, we're on borrowed time as far as like any lib pandemic posting or any election shit.
Well,
like,
okay,
you know.
so Jeff was talking a minute ago just about like this kind of it's just there's so much less accountability than China and the differences between, you know, their system and ours. And like in my mind, it kind of seems like when you kind of take a step back, the arrangement that power has over here looks far superior in some ways.
Yeah.
And like we're kind of talking about this as if it is this kind of like transition and like, oh, they got a zig or they got a zag, right? And maybe part of that is that maybe this is kind of in this is a very delicate balance that can't last. But I mean, what do you guys think of that? Right? Just that. I mean, as it stands right now, this seems like the best of both worlds.
Oh yeah, for that. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think they're feeling out that sweet spot where they get, as where you say, best of both worlds, and are going to try their best to just settle right in that sweet spot. I definitely don't think they want to transition past that. Excuse me, to like a China type thing. Like, I think this is a very much a feeling out period to try and determine exactly where that sweet spot is before they settle in.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the obfuscation thing and like who's controlling who, just like with the NSA leaks, just like they'd be like, oh, the state deputized AT&T and all these telecom communication companies, and it's like, oh, the state is the one who's pulling the strings on Capitol, whatever. It was like, I don't know. To me, I see it the other way. Like, I see it like they deputize them. You know what I mean? Like, they're the ones in control globally, and I feel like, you know, China. I mean, I guess. You could say China is the one that's got control of you know, the corporations on their side, and like they're the ones who are dictating things. I don't know about that. Maybe so. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. I'm not an expert on it, so I won't speak about it. But like, I feel like they're driven by the same things as any corporation is driven by. So
here's where I think it's a little bit different. Like, so obviously Capital it's not like Capital doesn't have influence in China, right? Like it has influence everywhere. Same thing in Russia or wherever, right? But some of these other non-Western countries, they are like, the way I put it when I write about this online is they're like real countries still. So even though like Capital might have influence, China is still like a real country with like an actual national project that they care about, you know, and things like that. The United States doesn't even rise to that level. The U.S. is not, I don't think, in any meaningful way a country. It's just basically a shopping mall. It's just a market. Like, it's just nothing. So I do think that is different in that, you know, China, because they are trying to do a national project there, that's why they have like a more formal sort of arrangement. And again, I'm not saying that China's national project is good per se, but I'm saying it exists. Similarly with Russia. And Russia's not necessarily similar to China, but Russia's got like a national project. Like, it's a real country, whether you like it or not. The United States is a whole different thing. Like, we're nothing, essentially, just other than the United States is just a market. We don't even have citizens. We just have market participants.
Yeah, there's no collectivism here, unlike their area.
Yeah, exactly. It's nuts. And then somewhere in between there, you have Europe, which I think is trying to feel out still whether it, you know, if at one pole you have the United States where you have no national project at all, and at the other pole you have, say, China or Russia, where you have a fairly robust national project. You know, the European Union to me right now is sort of feeling out where does it want to fall. And if it's going to fall on the national project side, I'm not saying it'll be authoritarian and dictatorial like China. I'm not implying that, but they are sort of, and I think there's a lot of forces battling each other and arguing in the EU right now over, you know, do we want to have some level of a national project, or do we want to be like the United States where we're just sort of an amorphous, sort of alienated market. And I think that's what you're seeing in some of these European elections in places like Italy is a good example, right? When you look at the differences between their parties and what's going on in their elections, or even sometimes you'll even see this sort of pull and back and forth within the same politician. And I think France is a good example of that, where sometimes Macron seems like he wants to basically be a new Napoleon and revitalizer of the French nation. And other times during his presidency, he seemed like a guy that was just like a Joe Biden type that was just installed by capital, right? He seemed more like that early on. And as his presidency's gone on, he's more moved in like a Napoleon direction, not necessarily a dictator. I just mean sort of this revitalizer of the French Republic. So it's, I think there's a lot. Europe is very interesting to me for that reason. Not to go too far off topic there, but
right, because the yellow vest and all that. Like, I guess he's got a bit more pressure to yield that way.
And they also have stronger national identities in these European nations for the most part.
Yes,
right.
Yes, absolutely.
So do you think that's so you would say, because we've had guests on here that have different takes on all this. So you would say we need more of the nationalist mindset that maybe a China or Russia has, but we don't want to fall under their sort of regime. And if they were like, I mean, I think we can all agree they're fairly expansionist to some degree. So so do you feel like we would benefit from more of their model, but sort of not being under their thumb?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think the United States would benefit tremendously from actually having an explicit national project. Right. Totally. So, I mean, you could choose to look at this in a couple different ways. The way I tend to look at it is that it's better, worrying about the global labor, I guess, on a global scale. I don't see how that is realistic or possible. Gotcha. But you can get people in your own country to sort of have a sense of national identity and pride and care about each other in that way. And oftentimes that can have beneficial effects for labor in your country, right? Like a national solidarity type movement. Historically, that has happened, right? And I'm not saying that's happened in the Marxist sense or whatever, but I mean, that is a thing that has happened and has improved people's lives. And like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be the way that China does it. There are other countries, I think, in Eastern Europe that are attempting to do this and maybe navigating it, differently than China, but having some level of success. But yeah, I hope I rambled a little bit there, but that's my answer to your question.
Yeah, you can have a strong national project where you emphasize on protectionism and substituting local production and stuff for imports, while also positively benefiting these dependent nations that we already ravage through imperialism, because through that national project, you would automatically be pulling back some of that imperialism anyways. So in a way, having a national project that's going to be focused on, kind of not necessarily anti-imperialism as a flag banner for it, but more so trade protectionism and kind of not isolationism, but non-interventionism. And that
interventionism, exactly.
That is in itself a pathway to being supportive for the international labor movement in general. It just that, I feel like people try to put the fucking, they try to jump the shark on that one a little bit. They try to go ahead of where they actually can go. You have to have national projects before, especially if you're going to be in one of these strong, dominant nations, United States, China, et cetera. If you're one of these nations that's going around and, kind of inflicting your will upon other smaller dependent nations, having a national project and doing that type of thing is really the first step you can take in supporting international labor.
Right. Yeah, we talked about this ages ago with Sadak on here about nationalism, and I pretty much agree. I mean, I think we've all kind of moved on this as far as not Slav. Slav was always right about this, but me and COH definitely I think we see there's pragmatic utility to starting there, and sort of what you just said, Jeff. If you want to think about the global hegemony and you want to address that, I mean, I don't know. It's sort of that's a lot to chew. That's a lot to handle on first go, and just sort of it's I think of it put the mask on yourself before you help anybody. What are you going to do to help these people? You're fucked up. Your shit's all fucked up. You're not even, the poor people in your country are starting to border a third world livelihood. So like, what are you talking about? You don't even have it a country. So like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not necessarily pro-nationalism, but I do see the utility in it. I do see the utility in like having that approach strategically. So that's how I view it. I think it is a good framework for getting a lot of these things moving in the right direction.
You can also, I was say you can also build, just speaking 100% pragmatically, you can build allies with it too, right? Because it's hard, it's hard for workers just to do stuff on their own, because they're just by their nature, it's just historically been proven very difficult, right? But if it's done as part of a nationalist project, you are going to, this is very controversial. A lot of people don't like when I talk about this, but you are going to have support from a faction of capital, right? The weaker faction, the national, non-global faction.
Yeah, COH talks about this a lot. Yeah.
And you can play that even if you're a part of labor, you can play that in your favor because you can extract concessions from them in exchange for support because they need you in a way that international capital doesn't. So that in itself is, I think has utility and pragmatic value.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to utilize like the different cleavages between the groups of capital and interests within capital in order to actually try to like put forth any type of workers' agenda. You have to weaken the overall structure of capital in the first place. And you do that by exploiting the differences between them in any way that you can.
Even historically, I mean, this is another one that sometimes riles people up, but history's mostly been moving by intra-elite conflict, right? I know that the traditional Marxist take is that it's by class struggle, but I don't think that's historically accurate. I think it's mostly, and I think Marxism is useful for class analysis, but I think history has moved forward predominantly through intra-elite conflict. So if you want to move forward something for the proletarian class or whatever, they're going to have to get involved in that conflict one way or the other. And it doesn't mean that the people that they're aligning with are even their friends. It can just be strategic alliances, right? Julius Caesar didn't want to align with the plebiscite, but he did because that was the option open to him, right? So, I think that has practical application in today's time as well.
Yeah, I think so, without a doubt. But like anytime you talk about anything like this, you're going to have people start screaming about Red-Brown alliance and about fucking being a fascist and everything like that, without understanding that we live in a society where like, yeah, some small business and small producers and like fucking kulaks exist in our society, and you can't just forget that. And like if you're going to try to like put forth any type of project to support working values and like working interests, you have to start a transitionary project. You can't just like hopefully look past everything that exists and then just like think that you're going to be able to topple it all. Like you have to start with steps that can make sense, that make progress and concessions for the working class.
The argument against that, and unfortunately, someone might disagree with me who has this position, but that I've heard when I've made that argument. And to me, this is just too bleak and too dark. So it's not an argument that I particularly subscribe to, but is the accelerationist argument where like, we've just got to get it where like everybody's wiped out and everybody's immiserated. And that's when we're going to get revolution, right? Jeff Bezos owns everything. We all work for him. Yeah. Like I can't wrap my head around that one or buy that one. How do you
expect to like be promoting, like saying that you are for the interests of the working class when you're just trying to say that you hope that the working class plot gets worse and worse?
I hate that shit. Yeah, I hate that shit because it's just so funny that you end up perfectly coinciding with everything they want to do. It's so funny. Like every position they want, everything they want to do with global trade and war and all that, you're co-signing with all that, but in a communist way.
Yeah,
fuck I've that. Referred to this. Fuck that.
Yeah, I've referred to this online as the Marxist Bezosist position.
Yeah, yeah, hell yeah,
yeah.
It's like it's like leftists trusting the plan. Like it's like fucking retarded.
It is.
Yes, exactly.
That's what it is. It's leftist plan trusting. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like, I get it.
It's fucking internet brain shit, dude.
It is. It's like shit that these people don't have actual stakes, and they're internet armchair people that are just like, well, maybe if some other people have terrible lives, like maybe that'll make some other people think about it differently. And it's like, no, how about like if you're actually going to try to proclaim yourself as being a part of a political project or trying to build a political project in the interest of the working class, why don't you actually look out for the goddamn working class in the first place? like, and not just in some grand scheme meta way, but like in some actual material change way. And like, you can do that with also having a grand plan for having larger change. Like, I'm not saying that I think reformism is the route that we have to go, as that's the grand plan, is like, if we just slowly chip away at capital forever and ever, we can fix it. Like, no, but I think we have to make concessions when we can in order to improve our lot, and then further empower working people with like resources and the ability to build upon that, and like maybe try to build a tiny bit of capital or accumulate something for themselves and their family that can provide some sense of power for them and the people around them. I feel like just have big goals or big demands, but accept weird concessions. You know what I mean? Like, it's like tactics versus strategy. Have revolutionary strategy, but employ tactics that are going to get concessions along the way. It's not exactly. Like, it's like, I don't understand why people think it has to be all one way or all the other way.
And the other thing is, like, how do you expect people to sign on to some project where your idea is, things are going to be terrible for you your whole life, and maybe your kids' whole lives too, but maybe like 2 or 3 generations down the line, there's going to be a radical break that we can't really describe yet or say how it would happen, but like, that'll happen. You just have to trust the plan, and your great grandchildren will have it better than you could ever imagine.
Yes, exactly. Or you're a moron, an uneducated heathen because you didn't read enough Marx and you don't understand that.
I don't care about my grandchildren. I might not even have any. Goddammit, I want some change now. Like, what the fuck?
It's hard balancing. I mean, talking to people, it's always hard to convey where you draw that balance between, being idealistic and being pragmatic. But I definitely say ask for the full measure, right? But like, accept the half or expect the half. But I don't know. It sort of comes down to people or Democrats or whatever asking for like a quarter or an eighth, and then you get a 16th. You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of how it looks. But like, it's hard to convey that because everybody will interpret that differently and draw those lines differently. But yeah, I definitely feel like you gotta have a realistic mindset about it. You gotta have a fucking, I don't know.
I mean, even just to garner support, man, you have to do
exactly. Who's gonna, exactly what Jeff said. Like, who the fuck is gonna vibe with that shit? Like, oh, well, read these 10 books and then talk to me, and then you once you're in my cult, this will all make sense to you. It's like, shut the fuck up, man. Like,
once you've read my translation of the 7 Seals, you'll know exactly how it's
like millenniarism, or what, I'm not pronouncing it right, but it's like, it's like a millennial cult. You know what I mean? Like,
these people are sick.
These people are fucking sick, man.
Well, exactly. But like, see, I guess that kind of transitions to the other thing, is like the economic populism thing, which is like, we don't care so much about labels. Like, we all got, the 3 of us have fucking different labels, and we don't even care about those labels that much. But like, as far as economic populism, I know you were one of the few people I know that like took that label and like, for however much stock you have in that. But like, I've definitely grown to find that to have most utility in terms of communicating an idea set. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how you feel about like how that pertains to like pragmatism and like, ideology, or like, but what do you think that means to you, or like how that applies in terms of
I think you hit it right on the head there. Yeah, the reason I use that term is because like, I don't really care particularly about a lot of these different like economic ideologies per se. I just sort of have like I have end results that I think are good, and I think you just work backward from there, in any practical method that you think you can achieve them. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not so focused on like, you can be really doctrinaire and say like, well, I'm a Leninist, so not to pick on them, but so, no matter what we do, we have to do it through like democratic centralism. You know what I mean? But I think that's like a backwards way to look at it. You should look at it like, I kind of look at it like, I want to live in a society where we have like relative peace among people. No one is struggling that bad. Personally, I don't believe in an entirely classless society. I don't think that that's possible, but I would like the distance between our classes to be smaller. Yep. I would like a society where the people that do rise to the higher class are how do I put this? Are, you know, the things that we reward are things that build a better society. You know what I mean? You could say you can support the idea of a ruling class existing, but still say that the way our current society is structured rewards the worst possible people and puts the sickest degenerates in that role, right?
Totally.
So I'm kind of more on board with that. So my point, I always make this stuff real simple. My points are always like, if you work 40 hours a week, you know, you don't have the quote unquote right to be super rich and buy everything you want, but you should not be precarious. Totally. Like if you show up to work from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and you don't screw around and you're willing to just like show up and do the basics, you just shouldn't be precarious. Yeah. And I don't think that should be a controversial position. And I just sort of kind of like work backwards from that.
Yep,
and I know that sounds like overly reductive and simplistic, but that's
I think that's
what I mean.
That's perfect. It needs to be somewhat simple in order to get people on board. Like I'm not so caught up in tactics and everything. I'm like by any means pilled. I'm just trying to get to the end goal. Like I want economic change, material change for working people, and I don't really care what you're going to call it. I just want to call it something that's going to be as digestible as possible to as many people as I know. And I know that the term Marxist or any type of shit like that totally isn't.
Right, because it's just taken on the interesting thing about Marxism is like it's taken on this connotation based upon because people that are out there labeling themselves in popular conception with that label are not really what I think more earnest Marxists would consider Marxists. So they're like what I would call like CIA Marxists, right? Like it's left. Yeah, exactly. So it's just taken, but that's what rightly or wrongly, that's just what enters in normies' brains. Because like normal people can't be bothered to like read all this theory shit.
Totally.
Right? They got a bunch of stuff going on. They got jobs. So all they know is like some lunatic college professor saying like wild shit about how they're evil because they're white says that they're a Marxist. So I don't know, Marxists must be bad then, right?
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't go any further than that for most people. And I'm not blaming people for that. It's just
and that's why I don't ever like try to parse out like, well, like the real left and the real Marxists and shit. Cause like most regular motherfuckers don't know what the fuck you're talking about when you talk about some real left or whatever the hell. Cause the real left is the real goddamn people they see and interact with, which are the people who are these crazy lunatics.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like if I go around like calling a plate a cup, and like enough people are just like, oh yeah, no, like that's a cup. That's a fucking cup now.
Yeah, like it's not it's not like this is a real plate, motherfuckers.
right. Like there's no they're not like breaking the rules of the simulation or something. Like it is as it does, you dumb motherfuckers. And that mix up that like this exact topic is just like it's not even funny how much wasted energy and time goes into this distinction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, as far as language is concerned, like colloquial shit, like that shit changes over time. So it's like, yo, you just gotta fucking adjust to it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, are you very concerned with being like the high priest, you know, ivory tower academic that knows the exact, you know, ancient definition of something? Or do you want to know what the fuck people will understand if you talk to them on the street? Which one?
Hop on a trend. That's why I said GameStop populism, motherfucker. Like, hop on the meme trend, whatever. It's digestible. It's on some by any means. We're just trying to get the bag. Like, do it. Like, you know?
The nerd shit is just not accessible. And as far as like, you know, you might say, hey, you know, I'm for you know, Medicare for all, or I'm for like healthcare for all people, or like nobody should be dying because of this, or housing or education or whatever. You say that and somebody might say you're a capitalist, or they might say you're a socialist for that same belief. Two different people might call you. So it's all it's all relative. So it's like, why? That's why, you know, the three of us come from different, you know, ideological backgrounds or upbringings or whatever. But like we sort of all fall under the same umbrella of just like, whatever, what the fuck ever. Like, I don't really care how you want to call it or how you identify. I don't really care. Like, you know, I mean, as long as it's, you know, precarity, I think is what you said is that's how I define it. When people are like, oh, why don't you say proletariat or lumpenproll or say all these fucking nerdy ass terms instead of underclass, whatever. I don't give a shit about that because most people don't know what the fuck that is. And if it's a term that you have to like, get all snobby about it and be like, well, actually the proper definition of this is if that's what your goal is, just to feel smart and superior to people, then fine, enjoy that, whatever. I don't really care about that. What I care about is being understood because that's the whole fucking point of talking. And for me, it's like,
go ahead. Sorry. Oh, no, I was just gonna say this is like this entire fucking shit show that I got in.
Yes,
exactly. These fucking losers. I'm sorry. Like, if you think that just saying like upper middle class isn't basically just an adequate way of describing most of these concepts, then like I've got bad news about like the efficacy of your political project. You
motherfuckers are arguing about terms that haven't been used in 2 centuries, talking about some like, well, petty bourgeois actually means this. Dude, I haven't even ever heard someone say petty bourgeois in real life.
Sometimes these terms lose their utility too, and even in highly theoretical arguments, like something if you weren't talking to a normie, I don't think petty bourgeois, I think that's a really good example, really encapsulates anything useful anymore.
So Jeff, what do you think of like of Bitcoin as like a vehicle for I mean, people say there's a lot of potential there in terms of like being more of a sort of like anti-establishment means of currency or whatever, things that are less less influenced by central powers. So what do you think of all that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased because I work in the industry, right? But I mean, I'll give you my like 30,000 foot view here as to why I think it's important and at least a useful tool. In terms of that, the first distinction I want to make is like, I'm only speaking about Bitcoin here. I'm not speaking about cryptocurrency generally, which most of the, cryptocurrencies that came later are essentially just basic pump and dump scams, which had, corporate sponsorship. So like, I'm not really going to address those per se, but with Bitcoin, one of the ways, and there's a website you can look at of just very straightforward and easy to understand charts called WTF happened in 1971.com, I believe is the website. And what the reference there is to the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. The reason why that was important and why those charts will show you that inequality like soared in this country immediately after 1971. I mean, there were other factors in play, of course, that have happened that have led to increased inequality over that time period. But if you look at those charts, it would be hard pressed for you to say that, the end of the quasi gold standard wasn't a factor. So for those that aren't aware, the Bretton Woods system was the monetary system in the United States that persisted from the end of the World War II until 1971. And it was, for all intents and purposes for this discussion, essentially a gold standard. The dollar was backed by gold. Every dollar represented a certain amount of gold, which was held by the U.S. government. It's oversimplifying a little, but for purposes of this discussion, that's fine. And the reason why that was important is because without that gold backing to the dollar, it allows the government to sort of print unlimited dollars, or actually not even the government, it allows the Federal Reserve, which is not the government. It's an important distinction. The Federal Reserve is actually owned by its member banks. To print unlimited dollars. And that has increased inequality since we went to that system. We came off the gold standard through something called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect basically says that when you print additional currency, the benefit of that additional currency disproportionately goes to the people who touch that additional currency first. And it's actually not all that difficult to explain why that is. So if you imagine a closed economy where the only thing for sale was 10 widgets, and all of the currency which was available in that economy was $100, every widget would cost $10, right? So if anybody in this little tiny closed economy wanted a widget, they'd have to pay $10 for it. That's the only thing that was for sale. If we increased the amount of currency in the system, or the amount of money, and we doubled it, and we did that in an even way where we just said everybody that has $1 now has $2, well, what would happen is widgets would double in price, but they'd now be $20 because the economy would have a grand total of $200 in it. Right. But we'd all be in the same boat, right? But I'd be paying twice as much money for my widgets, but I'd also have twice as much money. So I wouldn't really care one way or the other. Right. But that's not the way that monetary expansion works. So what really happens is when the monetary supply is expanded, let's say CRK and I are in this economy, right? Well, when we go from $100 in the economy to $200 in the economy, imagine that CRK got that full extra $100 credited his bank account, and I got none. Well, in the beginning, what's going to happen is that $100 that went into CRK's bank account, it doesn't hit the economy immediately because it's just sitting in his bank account for a while. So CRK gets to use it before anybody else, and he can use it when widgets are still only $10. So like he's getting a sweet deal on widgets. The more money of that he spends as that money starts to circulate through the economy, then the price of the widgets are going to go up. So if I'm the guy, just a little working guy at the end of the line, you know, by the time all that extra money makes its way into my bank account, well, widgets have already doubled and I got screwed because other people got to buy those widgets in real terms a lot less expensively than I did.
Gotcha.
So
the cost isn't going to go up just because the money was printed. It's got to be a reaction to people.
It's got to be out there floating in the economy.
Right.
It's got to be circulating.
Gotcha.
Exactly. Gotcha. So because otherwise, the widget makers don't know that the money doubled. That's just a natural supply and demand reaction as money sort of flows into the economy. Right. So that's how the Cantillon effect works. And it's a major driver of inequality. And in the United States, I mean, I used a silly widget example, but in the United States, when new money is printed, typically what happens is it comes from the Federal Reserve and it goes to the member banks. So they get the advantage of being able to purchase assets with this new money before it's fully circulating through the economy, and everybody else gets screwed, right? Gotcha. So a sound money, which has like backing by something rare, which historically has been gold, prevents you from being able to do this, because if you issued new dollars, you had to have new gold to back that up. So that was a sort of a hamstring on your ability to issue new dollars. Without that hamstring, what happens is, like in the United States, a lot of times we just don't raise taxes. What we'll do instead is, if we want to, let's say we want to do a new social program that was a good program. Let's say we just wanted to do Medicare for all. Right. And instead of raising taxes on rich people to pay that, maybe we'll raise taxes a little bit, but we're going to increase the national debt to cover the rest of it. Well, what happens when we increase the national debt like that is the debt doesn't actually get paid off in the way that people think. What happens is the Federal Reserve essentially prints new money, and that money gets used to pay off that national debt. And that money, again, when it enters the economy, it doesn't inure to the benefit to poorer people first. It inures to the benefit of the banks and their wealthiest customers first. So effectively what that does is, when you're even if that spending is on a new social program, like, this hypothetical Medicare for all, it's not being paid for by taxes on the wealthiest. It's being paid for by a hidden tax on the poorest people. Because it's sort of essentially a Cantillon effect tax. And a lot of times it's even worse than that, because this new money printing isn't even done to finance a social program. It's being done to finance stimulus that's going directly to the banks, like's been happening for the past year and a half. Right. That's not even going to the people at all. It's not going to a social program at all whatsoever.
Right.
The idea behind
and all that,
yeah, right. So the idea behind Bitcoin is, well, we can't force the government to adopt the gold standard to get rid of this, but we can create a parallel monetary system that it has a fixed supply. So there's only ever, it can be algorithmically 21 million Bitcoins. And it doesn't have a centralized control system. So the idea here is this gives people an alternative monetary system to opt into over time, which can potentially accomplish one of two things. And I'm agnostic as to which one of these two things happens, because they're both positive either way if Bitcoin is successful. Number one is, as Bitcoin increases in value against the dollar, in order to protect the dollar, the government has to react by not inflating the monetary supply so much, right? Which would reduce the Cantillon effect, which has some obvious benefits for all the reasons we went over. And then the other more radical thing that could happen over time is Bitcoin increases in value so much that the dollar hyperinflates in comparison and actually falls out of use as a national currency. That's a more radical, conception of the future there, admittedly. Either one of those are positive outcomes. Whether or not this happens or not, it's a project that I think is worthwhile, and it's something that I put my time into, because I do think that it makes it has the potential, at least, to make a tangible difference in people's lives for that reason. Usually the pushback that I get when I explain it as something that has potential to make a positive impact in people's lives is that, well, if that ever started to happen, the government could just shut it down. The problem with that argument, which is true, there are some people who are involved in Bitcoin that will tell you that the government couldn't shut it down because it's decentralized. Well, that's literally true, but the government could, in fact, outlaw what are called the fiat on-ramps and off-ramps, meaning basically the places where you buy Bitcoin for dollars, which would more or less lock most normies out of it, and it would go back to being something used for black market transactions. So effectively, yeah, the government could stomp this out in its tracks if it really wanted to. The reason why I don't think that'll happen, and the reason why I don't think that's happened yet, is you're sort of playing the greed of government officials against them. So the idea here is that government institutions and even banks and things like that are made up of people, right? So if I'm running a bank or I'm running the Treasury Department, I don't really give a shit if this fiat system, which has been good to me up until now, continues long term, as long as my family gets rich, right? And if I see this Bitcoin thing and I think this really has potential to take off, it kind of seems like a better deal for me to just buy in on it while it's still early and then reap the benefits to myself personally rather than, try and outlaw it and preserve the status quo system. So in that way, yeah, I mean, there are some, for lack of a better term, I'll use a squishy term here, bad people that are going to benefit too if Bitcoin takes off. But strategically, I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, this is a good because, yeah, what you were mentioning before about just creating new money and okay. I want to talk about a lot of things because we don't usually have people on here who want to talk economics, but but you're basically talking about MMT before of just printing this new money and basically
no, I mean printing money is not in itself MMT, right? So we don't really the current policy of the federal government today is not based on modern monetary theory, but it's still based on exactly what I just said. Proponents of MMT would typically argue that what we should do at the government level is take away the Federal Reserve's ability to control the money supply, move that ability to control the money supply into the elected government's hands, and then instead of the Cantillon effect, when we printed new money, we would just distribute it to poor people first so that the Cantillon effect wouldn't be an issue.
Like what you were saying before of M4A, like quantitative easing,
yes.
But towards M4A first, basically, towards services.
Right. That's a decent way to think about it. Yeah, in your head. Right. So when you think about someone like Stephanie Kelton, right, who's like a very prominent proponent of MMT, that's usually what they're talking about, right? They're talking about moving to more that sort of system. MMT itself actually just describes a theory of money, not necessarily a prescriptive system, but the system that they usually prescribe is what you just explained there. Something, obviously more complicated than that, but something along those lines. The problem with that, in theory, that would work. The stuff that MMTers talk about, would work in theory. I just think it's really hard to do. Like, imagine if you moved the money printing ability to Congress. I mean, do you really think that they're going to be incentivized to, make sure that new money goes from the bottom up instead of the top down? Because I don't. Of course.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly why people, we've had some people on here who are like pro MMT, and I'm just like, well, one, I don't trust them for one, and for two, the main thing I'm concerned about is like inelastic goods. Like if they pump the money out, right, like Yang's UBI and this stimulus money that's coming out is, in my mind, like all this lib pandemic bullshit is like basically like soft introducing UBI, and basically,
I agree with you.
As of the latest thing, like, and Biden's, Yang too, but like Biden's latest thing of like means testing, or they call it targeting now, but like means testing even more of like who qualifies for this, like less people getting a less amount, but like they're still basically introducing this idea of like, you're not going to work anymore. Automation is rampant. And like, we've got this lib pandemic and like just no more jobs. And like, you're not going to work anymore. You're useless. And we're not going to train you for anything. We're not going to do the whole, learn to code meme. And you're going to take this money and shut up and not to, raid our capital or not do anything too, much in the line of like civil unrest. And basically that's what this seems to me is where they pump out the money, and that money, if the cost of living isn't controlled at all, and you just have these inelastic goods for your housing or your healthcare or your education, things that you can't affect, like you can't affect what you just have to pay for it. There's no control over, like insulin or whatever. Like they can just spike that price, and that money that was handed, you're just a middleman. They just hand the money to you and you hand it to them. And it's sort of like you've got no, it's like a ploy to make it seem like they're helping you, but they're not really helping you. You're just sort of like the go-between.
Yeah, here's the
thing.
Subsidize
these people.
Yeah, right. Here's the thing. One of the things that I really worry about often is obfuscated power. Okay, because then we don't have a good sense of who's getting screwed and who's screwing who, as opposed to outward exercise of power, right? And that's one of the reasons, and we can talk about this a little more later in this conversation if you want, but like why I think like Michael Lynn's sort of proposed system of corporatism that he talks about is very good, because it's the opposite of obfuscated power. Money printing, the problem with it is it's very obfuscated power. It's very difficult for people to understand and conceptualize who is losing out in terms of purchasing power and who is gaining. So you're really relying on your politicians, under the most proposals that MMTers make, to exercise that obfuscated power in a beneficial way, when in fact it's going to be hard to hold them accountable for the way they exercise that power because of the obfuscation.
Mm-hmm. So you feel like the MMT would be more obfuscation, basically?
Yeah, in theory, it's not in terms of paying stuff with newly printed money. We're doing that now. We just do it through the Federal Reserve. I think in an MMT system, I think that we'd just be doing more of it. I don't know. Yeah. It might not even be per se worse than what we have now. It might be neutral, or it might even be slightly better. I don't know, but I don't think it would be significantly better for the reasons I say. It would be hard to hold. It's really hard to hold the money printers accountable, because it's really hard to figure out where that money's going when you're printing it and who it's benefiting. Whereas it's really easy to see, like, okay, if we have a hard money system, and the way we pay for stuff is we tax certain people, take their money, and then use that to buy stuff for other people. There's a lot of accountability there. Like, everybody can see what's going on. But when you're financing that sort of stuff through inflation, that can be very unaccountable and very obfuscated.
Right. Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess the other thing is basically like, do you... So what the time this has come up before on the show, like a while ago, basically is like, you see the dollar as dying, or like, it's not a matter of if, but when. And then basically two branches out of that, which is the gold standard or Bitcoin, is like the two, paths forward, basically, or path backward, if you want to think about it.
Or a Bitcoin standard dollar. That's the other thing. Like instead of you could still have dollars be the currency that we use, but the dollar could end up with Bitcoin backing instead of gold backing.
Gotcha. So do you feel like, well, for one, do you think that the dollar is like inevitably done? Like, do you think there's like a timetable on that, or do you think that's just...
No, so a lot of people that I work with and people that I respect a lot think it's imminent. They think like 20 years or less. I just wouldn't bet on that. There's a lot of tricks they can play. There's a lot of minds that have to be changed. There's I don't like making, predictions like that, but it's something that I think is worth my time. But like, I wouldn't, if you were like, oh, would you bet all the Bitcoin you have now on, the dollar dying in the next 20 years? I don't think I would I'm not saying I would bet against it, but I don't think I'd, outwardly go and confidently make that bet.
Gotcha. So of the three, so you saying that gold is the weaker link of all.
Yeah, gold is, it's easy to manipulate. It's easy. It's much easier to manipulate than Bitcoin is, because Bitcoin is so instantly auditable. Because you have this public blockchain, so we can be assured that the supply is not being expanded. Whereas with gold, you end up with this phenomenon called paper gold very often, where companies will write claims to gold for gold that they're not actually holding. And then that claim, which is essentially a piece of paper, gets sort of like traded around as if it were gold. So there's a lot more like chicanery that can go on with gold that's more difficult to do with Bitcoin.
Wow. Okay. That's really interesting because just intuitively, I thought gold was like the least manipulated of the three, but that's really interesting to know.
Yeah. Gold. I mean, the way it works is sort of Bitcoin is the least manipulated. Gold is the second least manipulated. And then dollars and silver are both very manipulated and both very manipulated. Yeah.
Gotcha. I guess a few more things to figure out is are you concerned about automation, like full automation? Is that and I mean that and UBI is usually in tandem. So like is that something you foresee, or do you think that's something that's over feared, just like the dollar collapsing? Like how do you view that in the future?
I don't know. My intuition has always been that the ruling class overplays and overhypes the threat of automation to get us to accept shit that we wouldn't normally accept. Like, it's fine that we're going to send all these jobs to be performed by slave labor overseas because, they're just going to get automated away if we don't do that, right? Or you hear that a lot with the minimum wage. Well, we can, raising the minimum wage is stupid. We shouldn't bother with it because we'll just automate away those jobs if we do that. You know what I mean? So it just seems too convenient to me. That it seems like every time you raise the specter of automation, you sort of give the ruling class everything they want if you buy into it. So that just naturally makes me skeptical that I'm not saying it's not going to happen at all, but that it's as serious of a problem as it actually is.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm definitely terrified of it. As like China and automation, I think are two things I'm definitely concerned about. I mean,
see, my take on China is a little bit different. Like I probably would have agreed with you 6 months ago. Now, and this is I'm not pro China. I just think that China is a useful foil to play against our own working class right now. I mean, excuse me, our own ruling class right now is what I meant to say there. Is a useful foil to play against our own ruling class right now. Because the impression that I've gotten is that our ruling class is actually a little bit concerned about China because they have this national project, that China has a little bit too much influence over global capital in terms of getting them to do stuff that they don't want to do. And as a result, I think our ruling class in the U.S. is going to actually do a 180 from what they were doing previously and start hyping up anti-China hysteria. And they're going to do that to build popular support to ram the TPP through, which they weren't able to do under the Obama era. So the point of the TPP was actually to get production out of China and into other low-cost Southeast Asian countries, right? Which helps capital diversify their eggs out of the China basket, so they're not as dependent on the whims of the Chinese Communist Party all the time. And then it also helps as a counterbalancing factor against the point that production in China actually is getting a little more expensive now, just because standards of living in China are increasing. Right. Yeah,
right. Compared to Southeast Asia, yeah, Vietnam's like supposed to be the new China and all those.
Right, and that's TPP. I mean, pretty explicitly is so that some of these giant global corporations can do less production in China and more in Vietnam. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. It's like I see what you were making a connection, like the trade to automation. To me, it just seems like the logical thing to do is to get cheaper labor, right? If you're from the 30,000 feet, your global capital, like you have no fealty to any of these nations. You don't really care either way, right? You just want the cheaper labor, so you go where it's cheaper. And then the next logical thing after that, lower standard of living, lower labor rights, right? Which China has worse than ours, and Vietnam, Southeast Asia, and so on, right? You just follow that chain logically. And I think the next logical step after that is not a human, right? And I mean, this is the thing is like, once you have a machine, there is no concern for labor laws or any of that. And
right. I just don't know how practical it is. I don't know how many humans you can automate away. I don't know what the practical ceiling on artificial intelligence is. I've talked to a lot of different people that I think are smart that have like radically different opinions on that. Right. So like Elon Musk says we should be scared as shitless of AI and that it can like do everything. Right. And then I've talked to other people that are like, it's not really going to be that big of it's not, it's going to get better, but it's not going to be, we're not going to end up with Skynet. Right. So I I don't have the technical background to know the answer to that question, I guess.
No, sure. I mean, I think the two components are intention and capability. I think intention is clear. That's undeniable.
I agree there.
Capability is the thing where, I have, respectful disagreements with a lot of people about as far as like how soon it can be. But in my mind, like, I'm not an expert on it, but to me, it's just like, it's pretty undeniable that the amount of like laborers in a factory today are less required than what they used to be 10 years before, 10 years before that, self-checkout and, just like, my friends who, people I've known who've like, worked in Amazon or whatever. And a lot of these warehouses, the distribution facilities, like they need less people. They got more machines doing a lot more work. It's only smart business for them. So, I mean, intention is clear. Yeah, the capability debate, again, like, we need experts to, people who know it better to parse that out. But in my mind, I mean, I think the evidence is clear that it's moving that way. And I think to your point is, I mean, if things move in that direction, and this is, I guess, very non-material and very squishy, but I don't like UBI because I just think there's something to the human spirit when people just aren't doing anything productive all day. I've just kind of seen that. I grew up in an area where a lot of people received just government benefits and didn't work. And, usually what happens in that case is what you end up doing to fill your time is drugs. I don't think that that's good. And some people use that as an excuse against, bringing people out of precarity. And I, of course, don't mean it that way. My point is, like, if we get to that point where we just need we have a lot less necessary labor, I hope that we just pay people to do unnecessary shit, but that still feels productive. Rather than give someone a UBI, I'd rather pay them, to use words that Bog Beef did on a recent stream I did with those guys. I'd rather just pay someone $25 an hour to stack Dinty Moore cans than give them a UBI, right? I just think that's much better for society in general. And that is the one good thing that I really do like about a lot of the proposals that MMTers come up with is the jobs guarantee. At least conceptually, I completely get the benefit of that, right? You give people something to do, they get paid. That's just a really strong net societal positive. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, this is all different points of where people get cynical or optimistic, obviously, and I feel cynical about the saving of the job market or meaningful work. I feel like that is. I feel like it's on a one way train, and I don't think there's a. I sort of I could see what you mean, where you might concede that ground and be like, oh, you're basically giving what they want, basically. But in my mind, I think it just means you need to change the terrain of what you demand and what you fight for. In my mind, it's just like, all right, we need to be focused on universal economic programs, making sure the things that are inelastic demands basically are covered. That should be the focus.
One that comes up a lot in my head too that I don't hear talked about that much is like, if there's less necessary work that needs to get done, you can just cut the work week. You know what I mean? Right. You know what I mean? Like, if you, something that you could use one employee for working 40 hours, if, you'd need almost two of them if you cut the work week to 25. Which they kind of do. They kind of do with the gig economy. They kind of do this fracturing. But then the question is like benefits. Like, do you get adequately paid? Right. That's the issue. You have to do it in a way where people are still getting adequate pay and benefits. It's like you're not just cutting their hours. It's like you have to you're getting a full-time wage for 25 hours instead. 25 is a random example. Rather than a full-time wage at 40. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I think that would make sense. Like a jobs program, like things to bring back work. I think that argument that like, oh, people spiritually need work is pretty compelling. And I think I would say like the things that might come up of like the drugs and like the negative externalities of like not having work might just be from not having stable social like safety net. But I could also see that like that might not be everything too. I think it's both. Know what I mean? I think it's both. I mean, I think that definitely not being stable is part of it because you're depressed, right? And a lot of people turn to drugs when they have
problems and they're sad and depressed, as anyone would be if they had a stability issue like that. But the thing that makes me think it's not the whole thing is who's the other group of people that gets all strung out on drugs? It's really rich people who don't have to work, right? So
that's very true. That's very true.
I think it's a lack of meaning a lot of the time, and I think that having like meaningful, productive work goes a really, really long way.
I agree. Yeah.
I think that's undeniably part of it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That is a fair point. That even people, and that's the question too of like right wingers I talk to are just being like, oh, you want to like make poverty less miserable, and you want to like help people escape poverty, but then it's like, oh, what's the point of people being like satiated or basically like not living in that despair if there's what's the existential meaning, spiritual meaning, or drive to your life, basically, which is a lot of questions I get more from right wingers than left wingers. And I think it's a fair question. I think it's a fair point of like it doesn't necessarily answer that void, but then that's where I sort of am nihilist. I'm like, I don't really think there is an answer to that, honestly, but I get what you mean. Like, yeah, I don't even necessarily know
if it needs to have like that like confident of an answer of like this is what a meaningful life objectively is. Like, I think you can even kind of like approach it in a kind of a cynical way of just being like, well, this is like a tried and true recipe for kind of at least like gaming that part of your brain into
correct.
Thinking.
Yeah.
Like, that's like you can make a very cynical argument in much the same like. So I am Catholic, I am a believer, but I also acknowledge that you can just make a very cynical argument in favor of religion for the same reasons, right? And I think all the same arguments hold up whether you do it cynically or non-cynically. I don't know. I'm looking for a better word than that, but I think you guys know what I mean.
Yeah, kind of like almost like instrumentalizing these things, or utilitarian almost. Yeah. What do you mean? What do you when you use religion as kind of a parallel? What exactly do you mean?
Well, I mean, like I'll give you an example. Like you can. One of the ways in certain countries historically that you've been able to accomplish broad popular support for things like social programs has been done through Christian democratic parties, right? Specifically in Europe, right? So, and part of the reason that that's done, at least some percentage of the people that supported those Christian democratic parties, even if not today, but certainly in the time when a lot of these programs were passed, did it because they supported those programs because the party supported them out of this, at least outwardly, this obligation that you had to your fellow citizens, right? That was religious in nature. So Christian democracy as a political European Christian democracy, those parties come out of a papal encyclical, Rerum Novarum, right? So that kind of outlined all that. So you can look at that and you can say, okay, well, I'm Catholic and I believe what the Pope wrote in Rerum Novarum was correct, and that's why I support these sort of social relations. Or you can look at it cynically and say, well, who cares? Enough people believed it that we got it done, right? Either through some combination of people that truly believed it or people that didn't believe it but just supported it because it benefited them materially. It still got done. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's like a political form, like
right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And I think that like when people hear that, they like immediately think that that's like an insult. And I think that's kind of funny, but like, I don't even mean it as an insult. And I think that, looking at it that way can be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, I'm a believer and I don't find that, I don't think anyone should find that insulting. It's just a reflection of reality.
Yeah. And I think that it's almost kind of like to put it in maybe kind of like dumb terms. Perhaps one of the reasons why it can be such a useful tool is because just like bringing it back to what I was saying about memes earlier or something, like they're these kind of insulated communities that have this catalog of their own, terms and symbols, memes, if one would like to use that term, at the ready shorthand for communicating ideas and values in a way that I think that like liberal capitalism has hollowed out all public spaces to make it just so that they're basically just canals for ejecting and pushing in the latest symbols and meanings. And this is something that I've talked about in the past a little bit of like, while I do think that like, I guess like ultimately, I wish on some level that I could think in like, I was raised, you know, kind of in a secular household, and I kind of wish that I was able to like kind of rewire my brain to at least think whatever religious people think. I kind of want that on some level. But like, I ultimately think that it's probably best not to go backward towards those things. Having said that, I think that they're these kind of spheres that have withstood at least better than other spheres that hollowing out that I described earlier.
Right, and what they've specifically withstood, I think, is commodity fetishism. So I think we've reached a point like in a country like the United States where it's almost like an extreme commodity fetishism where we just every aspect of our lives we think about, just our brains just operate completely in market terms, right? It's to the point where I think a large percentage of our population can't even not think that way. And at a minimum, I think religious people, and not all religious people, but some amount of religious people have maintained some ability to think about the world in a way that's not market mediated.
I agree. I mean,
I think that's a really, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up, but just, I think that's a really concise way of saying what I said. And I think that's a really good way of putting it.
I think where we come together on a lot of this is like, you know, I don't necessarily care about like religion or family, or I wasn't raised that way, or I kind of was, but I just didn't care about it. But like either way, like, you know, I'm more concerned with like what they're trying to replace it with, right? Like say I'm not that wedded to those traditions or values or whatever. I am concerned with what they're replacing it with, and what they're replacing with it is fucking nightmarish, you know, nightmarish consumerism, like hollowed out, empty shit. So that's why I'm sympathetic to people who you know, feel like that's more something we need to hold to sort of reject this, what they're doing basically. And I totally get that. I mean, I think that's valuable. I don't think work itself is that, I don't have any like romanticism about work itself myself. I mean, I think every generation works so that the next generation works less. I think that's been the like trend of human history. Yeah, I think that's been the trend of human history. And like, you know, if you know, the road of that is, you know, that the next generation is a little bit more full of like fuck ups that like, you know, AJ Sopranos or whatever, that are sort of like, you know what I mean? Like basically like listless or whatever. Like if that's the trend of it is, I mean, shit. I mean, that's just the way we've been going. I mean, that's just what we're designed to do. And I mean, I think there's new meanings you can find out of that. And, you know, as far as like the rich people being like on drugs and all that, I totally agree. Like they're just listless and, you know, they just fall into like hedonism and despair or whatever. But, you know, I don't, and my response to like the right wingers too is like, I don't want everyone to be rich. You know, that's not my mentality. I just don't want them to be precarious. I don't want them fucking.
I think that's mine as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why I don't want to conflate the two of like, you know, of people, some people on the right will be like, so you want everyone like living rich, like the rich
fully
people,
automated luxury communism.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And on the flip side, there's a lot of leftists who want that, and that's not how I view it. I just don't want people fucking scrambling around just to get by. Like that's what I don't want. So, you know what I mean? And if I don't think that will create a lot of like spiritually like bankrupt people. I don't think so either.
No, I agree with that.
But guys,
I don't think eliminating precarity is the thing that's going to, I agree with you, that caused that. Yeah.
Right. And it just reminds me, and maybe it's a little bit of a side note, but that just talking about that in those terms just reminds me of just the framing of like, you know, anything short of politics that isn't striving for a classless society is totally just a compromise that we need to reject. It's kind of a callback to what we were saying earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think the UBI thing is sort of like the in-between of like, do we give these people work and meaning, or do we give these people like some stability? That's sort of like they're in between finessing like of those two things. And like, you don't get stability because it just gets consumed up by, you know, housing or all these predatory people that take your money. And then there's, you're not getting any value of like having productive work either. I feel like that's their goal, but they're in between of like just dealing with things. So just shut everyone up and like, whatever side you fall on that as far as what you think the real solution is, it's clearly not either. It's clearly them trying to like,
and Hilaire Belloc talked about this in his book, like over 100 years ago, The Servile State. The UBI is basically the concept of the servile state that he described 100 plus years ago. And his general idea, he was wrong about certain things. Even there's things he wrote in The Servile State that in his later books he sort of changed course on. But the one thing I think he was right about is that like capitalism was like, it was unstable. It had too many contradictions going on because eventually you'd get to the point where capital was centralized in like a tiny group of hands, but they still needed consumers, but those consumers were also their employees. So like you're at the same time incentivized to pay your employees as little as possible in order to earn to maximize your profit. But if you do that and you take it too far, then you don't have consumers for your products, right? Because they can't afford to buy them. So the servile state was basically his prediction for how things would go. He didn't talk about UBI specifically, but that you'd see in the future, he predicted like basically programs that would give people just enough to be able to consume, but they'd still be sort of in a miserable state of affairs and not have control over their own lives. And I'm oversimplifying his thesis in his book there for purposes of this, discussion. But I think that's whenever I think of UBI, I think of Bloch's servile state.
Yep. Yeah. I have similar like fears of how things will turn out. And yeah, that totally makes sense to me. But I guess before we go, is there anything you wanted to plug before we left off here?
You guys can just follow me on Twitter. I'm sure you'll put in the show notes my Twitter handle. And you can check out my Twitter bio to see the stuff that I do, what my job is. Basically, I help people move some of their retirement assets into Bitcoin. That's my day job. So take everything I said as a biased person, as if you got it from a biased source for that reason.
And also for biased info, like when do you think this Bitcoin correction is bottoming out? Because I bought in I'm on Robinhood. I got to get the fuck out because Robinhood sucks. I got to get to fucking Coinbase or whatever. But like, I don't even own it. I'm just speculating on it. But like, yeah, I bought in like a couple months ago, like 6 months ago before the big spike. And I pulled out at like 30 because I knew it was got to correct. But like, when do you think this? It's pretty volatile now. I mean, it's
we're up
volatile.
To 40 almost today.
Really? Yeah. Shit.
Yeah, we're up to almost 40,000. The last week has been fairly strong. It's hard to say. The overall trajectory is much easier to predict than shorts. Over years than it is looking at things like months when they get in and out of the market. Right. So I never try to time anything. Unfortunately, I don't have good advice in terms of timing. The most.
Do you think the 100 projection is?
Yeah.
Like
so I was about to say the most persuasive pricing model I've seen is the stock to flow model, which was put together by this guy. It's Twitter Anon. Plan B is his name. But you can tell from his, modeling, obviously he's a quant, whether you buy into it or not, he's a guy with a financial background. And his model would seem to indicate that, within the next anywhere from this summer through next summer or something like that, you'd be looking at $100,000 Bitcoin. So, you can take that with a grain of salt. I'm not in the price prediction game, but that's out there.
I mean, it's amazing watching what's going on. I mean, it's just, people close to me are like very like following it very closely. And I've just been sort of like watching from afar, but like, it's crazy. It's crazy so far, but it's good to know. But I think that's everything we were going to get to. I don't know if there was anything else.
No, I think we had a good conversation here. I had a good time, guys.
Yeah,
it was great having you on, man.
Thank you very much for having me.
Much appreciated, man. Thanks.
Have a good one.
Take care.